having nothing to do on the dark and the rainy night. Well, I was cruising by the local graveyard when I saw such a terrible sight. Two bony skulls were digging, them sitting right out of the ground. But they were digging back to back, and neither of them looked around. But finally they both was out of the grave and on the ground by a big tombstone. It's such a fad I've never seen. They screamed, screeched and moaned. Oh Lord, it was a fight. It took place that night. Old bony head was a knocking, the skinny old bone was popping, and I was hit by a big headstone, and I was scared half to death.
What's up, decomposers? Welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin from the Black Lagoon.
I'm Frankendylan's monster.
I see you actually did the, the ownership. You're not Frankendylan. You're Frankendylan's monster.
Yeah.
Which I guess that means our dad is Frankendylan?
Don't think too much about that. You're poking holes in it. What are you doing?
I did just watch Son of Frankenstein. Very fun. And Young Frankenstein might be just a whole cloth remake of Son of Frankenstein, because it even has the inspector with the wooden arm and the darts. He stabs himself with the darts. They do that in Son of Frankenstein. He's got a wooden arm that he has to manually move and do all the stuff, and he puts the darts in the arms. Like, you took this whole character and used it. Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's a fun movie. That's right. It is our Halloween Spooktacular, which we soft launched last week with our Groovy Ghoulies Patreon-sponsored episode. But this is the version of the show where we choose the records and we pull from the genres of psychobilly, horror punk, death rock, and goth rock. And we'll get into more of that later. But, it is kind of funny that punk rock has subgenres that are so closely tied with Halloween that we can do multiple episodes of this. In years past, we've done 4 or 5 episodes a month during the month of October, but we are just going to do the 2 weeks now.
Yeah, we're going to scale it down a little bit.
Yeah, it was a little overly ambitious.
And we're realizing we're burning through the interesting stuff.
Yeah. So we are getting close to Halloween. I believe this one goes up the week before Halloween, and then next week's episode will be the Wednesday before Halloween. I think it's a Friday this year, so be on the lookout for that. And it's one of my favorite gimmicks we do every year, and it is very useful that there are 4 subgenres that can fit under this gimmick.
It's very nice that these subgenres are pretty tidy, too. It makes it very easy to find releases. It's not like other holidays where there's Christmas punk stuff, but you got to dig to find it. And this, you can just go, horror punk, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's not Christmas punk as a genre,
Yeah.
Unless you count bands like 2-Inch Winky, who are a Misfits parody band that sings about Christmas instead of Halloween.
Yeah. I guess we could do that for Christmas this year.
We could. That'd be pretty funny. I don't know anything about the guys who made those records, so there might not be anything to talk about, but they're fun. If you head to patreon.com/punklotopod, that's where you get access to all of our weekly bonus audio, where last week you can listen to the newest edition of the 21st Century Breakdown, the series where I rank my personal 100 favorite albums of the 21st century so far. Got a little behind on that one, but I got one of those recorded and in the can already, so be on the lookout for that. And when that happens, that usually means that Dylan and I recorded a producer audio. So at the $5 producer tier, you get access to a once-a-month exclusive bonus audio where we talk about an EP. And what did we talk about, Dylan?
So we talked about To Mother, Dearest Mother. To Mother by Babes in Toyland from 1991. And it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah. I would say the conversation was fun. And leave it at that. That is a poll-determined episode every month. So if you want to vote in the poll for next month's episode, if you go to patreon.com/punklotopod and sign up at the $5 tier, you can vote in our poll. And that means you get to choose from DOA's Disco Sucks from 1978, Kiss It Goodbye's Choke from 1999, Cursive's Burst and Bloom from 2001, and Blacklisted's So You Are a Magician from 2012. So you can vote and choose which one of those you want us to talk about next month for the producer audio. Producers also get their names said on the show every single week, so shout out to our producers, Dave Brown, also my co-host on the podcast, Bookenders, and writer of the newsletter, Oklahoma Lefty. Shout out to Steve Long, host of the podcast Rebel Nerd Radio. Shout out to Jason W., writer of the newsletter Songs About Chocolate and Girls. And shout out to Zach in Oregon, who just saw Amusement, I believe for the second time now. So very jealous that I am not seeing Amusement. And you can sign up at our $10 tier where you get to choose the album we devote an entire episode to, much like last week's episode on the Groovy Ghoulies, Fun in the Dark. And we have another one of those coming up in November. So be on the lookout for that. All right. So we do this every year. We talk about our genres, our horror punk, our psychobilly, death rock, goth rock. And for this year's version of the show, I don't know, did we start this way last year? I can't remember. But basically
we decided to just do it this way this year.
Okay, so that's a new decision we made. We slightly tweaked our format for the Halloween Spooktacular. Before we were just choosing stuff that looked interesting to us based on nothing. Just like as long as it's one of those genres, you could pick it and we could talk about it. Instead, this year for the holidays, we kind of started in the middle of the year. We didn't do it initially at the beginning of the year, but we're going to assign years for this. So it was my turn. So I had the year 1987. And before we get into what I nominated, or before we get to what I selected to consider, what is going on in our subgenres in 1987?
The 80s is a pretty busy time period for spooky music. Certainly one of the more active decades for a couple of genres. 87, not really a good year for horror punk in itself, because the Misfits are long done, and there's not really much else that fits. So it's much more adjacent material that comes up. But White Zombie put out Soul Crusher, which, how do we properly categorize White Zombie?
Yeah. In general, how do you categorize White Zombie? Early on, what? Noise rock?
Yeah.
There's some no wave in there. He's from the New York scene too. There's some groove metal.
Yeah, I would say it eventually kind of becomes an alternative metal, groove metal,
industrial metal kind of
which
thing.
Which eventually gets into, with Rob Zombie's solo material, almost entirely industrial.
Yeah, kind of. He changes that project too. That kind of evolves over the time. Yeah. I mean, that is one thing to be said about him. He didn't just do one thing his entire career. Always kind of changing things up with White Zombie. And then I think even Rob Zombie's solo stuff is getting changed up a lot still.
Yeah. So, but he's one of those figures of, the macabre. He's always had that horror aesthetic. There's potential for some Rob Zombie showing up in these.
Well, we did the one White Zombie EP a long time ago.
I would like to do some better Whites.
Yeah. One of the LPs, from the 90s, yeah.
Down the line. I think that could be fun. But there's other stuff that Fear Itself.
Don't know who that is.
Serial Killers.
Don't know who that is.
Don't know.
It's funny. Horror punk is, up to a point, horror punk was just the Misfits. Like, there was nobody else that was really called that.
Yeah.
You would get some other stuff get called death rock occasionally, but I can't think of... It was either Misfits or Misfits related. Like Bobby Steele's The Undead, which was just like him doing the Misfits without dancing. That's a horror punk band. I can't think of any others that you would really call a horror punk band in the 80s. Because then it just turned... In the 90s is when you start to get more of that kind of stuff, but...
And then you just really are getting, like, the Misfits version of Ramones core. It's like...
Yeah.
It's just bands doing an imitation of the Misfits.
Yeah.
So, horror punk, always the most tenuous of the spooky subgenres.
It's the thinnest. It's just Misfits sounding things, and, like, 3 other bands. Oh, you know what? Some very early TSOL gets called horror punk too.
And even that stuff, I feel like early TSOL is just like feeding into death rock anyway.
Yeah, especially that second record, like the orange lettering.
Like New Church would be a death rock band too, and they're so early in that sound that they kind of like have the horror punk similarity. And I mean, I think the Damned are like almost could be considered a horror punk band.
Yeah, they're kind of like the Groovy Ghoulies in a sense. You know, like people don't really call the Groovy Ghoulies a horror punk band, probably because they're just doing Ramones core. I bet the reason why the Damned don't really get called horror punk is because they're already 77 UK punk.
Yeah.
And then later turn into like that goth punk thing they did later.
Yeah.
So it's like, we can't hat on a hat this. Also, punk was so new as a genre that horror punk as a genre would be weird. I don't even know if the Misfits, like their 70s material was even considered horror punk.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone was using that term.
Yeah, and I don't think they were until like the 80s when the Misfits took off. And even then, they were just talking about them.
But other stuff is a little easier to define. We've got some death rock.
A very hard genre to define.
I say it's easier to define. It's more of a, there's more bands.
Death rock is weird. Like, it's such a hard genre to like even kind of describe what it is. It's like, okay, so it's like horror punk.
Hardcore.
But it's also not.
Yeah. It's got a little bit of like, there's like a bit of a club feel to it. Yeah, death rock is, but it's also like comes from anarcho-punk.
Yeah, right. Rudimentary Peni being in there, yeah. There's also those like a shit ton of Japanese death rock bands too.
Yeah, who all kind of sound like really just an evolution of Japanese hardcore.
Yeah, that Burning Wind stuff. 45 Grave are probably the most notable US death rock band. And they have, like, what, 2 records? It's not even that much of an output. I guess you could put some... See, Flesh Eaters are, like, a weird band, too, that, like, they're not psychobilly, but they're kinda.
Yeah.
But also,
yeah.
People don't call them a horror punk or death rock band that often, either. I guess
Yeah.
maybe there's some horror punk in there, but, yeah, not a lot.
But there's Live Skull, there's Alien Sex Fiend, Christ on Parade. Not great stuff, but,
Yeah.
but it's there.
Yeah.
I think you can kind of, like, clearly delineate what it is. Goth rock, we're getting bigger. There's more of this stuff. Less argument over genre.
I will say, though, you said that about goth rock being, like, less genre. There is also a lot of, like, dream pop and, like, cold wave that gets kind of stuck in with goth rock, too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have some things kind of mentioned here, like, there's a For Against record that kind of gets a goth rock tag, but I think is maybe also more of just like a chill post-punk thing. Mm-hmm. But I think stuff that people wouldn't really argue is goth rock would be like Christian Death. They put out a record. Swans put out a record, which you maybe could argue. Are they a goth rock band? But
I wouldn't. I just think they're just no wave, really, or noise.
But they're not really no wave past a certain point. They kind of come from that scene, but they don't actually really sound like it. You know, they're not doing like jazz bass, you know. The Cure, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that one. Yeah, that one was one that I could have selected. We've talked about how we need to choose a Cure record for one of these episodes at some point. But I was like, oh, cool, The Cure. And then I was like, oh, this might be one of their least goth records, too. It's like very poppy. I mean, it's a long record, too. It's a really big, I think it's a double LP. But I never really thought of that record as a goth record, even that's what their sound technically is.
I would just generally call The Cure a goth rock band.
Yeah.
Sisters of Mercy, Floodland, which we talked about last year.
Yep.
Came out in 87. And Pink Turns to Blue put out a record. There's an X-Mal Deutschland. There's lots more stuff that's got the goth rock tag, but I didn't really pinpoint them. We'll talk about a couple of them in your almost picks.
Yeah. Yeah, so the stuff that I was considering, I pulled a few things, and because we're doing the year method, it was actually kind of tough to kind of narrow it down. I mean, yeah, I probably could have done that Cure record, and we probably could have gotten away with it, but it just didn't feel Halloween-y enough for me to really use it. Maybe an earlier record, maybe Disintegration, maybe Pornography, you know, one of those other, maybe even whatever, I forget what's after Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. That might even work too, but I was just like, I don't know if that one really fits the vibe of what we're doing. And so I picked out a few different things. I had initially picked out Downraiser by Fields of the Nephilim. We covered a Fields of the Nephilim EP back in our old version of the show where we did an album and an EP. So they were featured on one of our Halloween Spooktaculars in the past, but I feel like we didn't really get too much of a grasp on them at the time. So I'd be down to... I was interested in seeing kind of what they would have done on album. This one
of the stuff that you selected, that one stood out to me as being that's their biggest record.
It's not, but
one of their biggest. It's certainly notable enough. I guess.
Yeah, I think it's like their
third
third
record.
record.
Cover and I was like, oh yeah, that one. And like when I've looked at the other stuff that kind of fits in this year, that's one of the more standout releases.
That was the one that I was the closest to picking outside of what I did choose, because I was just like, yeah, this fits what I'm going for vibe-wise, genre-wise. It's pretty clear-cut gothic rock. The artwork is very goth-inspired, but we had done an EP before, and that was ultimately why I was like, well, I want to try something new, and so I passed on that one. So I also considered Mother Juno by the Gun Club. We consider the Gun Club a lot on this show. We've yet to pull the trigger and actually do one. No, pun was not intended there, but we'll let it lie. But ultimately, I was like, that's not the record to do. That's not the Gun Club record. There's actually like 2 or 3 Gun Club records that would be the ones to do, but it's not Mother Juno.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Gun Club, I feel like they're like the Damned.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, do I limit them to this month?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I do
never really reached for a Gun Club record in October. Like, oh, this is perfect for this season.
Yeah, and one of their biggest records.
Gun Club records other times.
One of their biggest records is called Miami. I mean, that's not really spooky, you know.
Yeah, and they're an LA band.
Yeah, and they're also like more. I guess you would call them more like punk blues than horror punk, even at the time. They get a horror punk tag though, but I think that's just because they're part of that same scene as 45 Grave and.
Yeah. They get that loose death rock tag because that scene overlaps so much.
Yeah. A lot of the same people played in those bands, too. Flesh Eaters being another one. I did consider The House of Dolls by Gene Loves Jezebel. We have done a Gene Loves Jezebel EP as well. The thing that held me back from choosing this one, though, is they're a weird band because depending on what period of their catalog you were looking at, sometimes they're just like a college rock, alternative rock, some jangle too. Like they're not a strictly goth band. There's like some psychedelia and a lot of their stuff too. Like they're not just one thing. I think they just had some stuff that is a little gothy, and that's kind of why they get like a goth rock sub genre. I'd be interested in listening to it, but when I sampled, I was like, this is not spooky at all, or even like kitschy. It's just like kind of straight ahead alternative rock. So that's kind of why I passed on that one.
We don't want to have another The Cult.
Yeah. We did that Cult record last year, or maybe the year before. But listening to it, it was like, this is not that gothy.
Yeah.
And this one wasn't actually on my list, but I did note it when I was going through the albums. And because I'm going through this catalog on the I'm listening section of our bonus audio, I was like, well, I already talked about this record recently. I'm talking about this group and in general, but Shaded Pain by LSU, LS Underground, Lifesavers Underground, would have been great. And I really do think that if I hadn't already talked about it on an I'm listening recently, I probably would have picked that record, but I didn't put it in the list just because I was like, all right, y'all are getting enough Mike Not talk from me on the bonus audio every week, so I didn't even really consider it, but I just decided to mention it because it was there. Probably the biggest Lifesavers Underground record, so, and very dark and goth rock, and it's good. It's probably one of the best records by LSU.
So, out of all those options, there was one that won, and what is it?
It is Don't Touch the Bang Bang Fruit by the Meteors.
Go, buddy, go.
stats on the band. They were from London, England. They formed in the year 1980. This is their 6th album and was released, I don't have a month, I don't have a date. It was just released in 1987 on Anagram Records. And the person on this record is Arms Malone on bass and backing vocals, Toby Juggy Wuggy Griffin on drums and backing vocals, and P. Paul Finnick on guitar and vocals. It was produced by P. Paul Finnick and engineered by Colin Peter.
All right, Daddy-O, why'd you pick this one?
All right, cool cats. I picked it because I thought I would have more fun with it than the other options that I had nominated there. When I made that list of the initial 4, the one I was leaning towards the most right off the bat was the Meteors. But then I looked at the record and I was like, is this one of the bigger records? Is it like a spooky album? Like, does this fit the theme that we're kind of going for? And I kind of hemmed and hawed a little bit on that one. And I was like, is it enough like it? And we'll get into it more, I guess, when we talk about the actual record. But I think it's close enough that it works. And they're very known for basically starting the psychobilly scene in Europe. So I thought they were important enough that we should do them. I think they have records that are considered much better than this one or more popular, but this was a pretty decent record at the time as far as like size, and not a very it's well regarded, I think. So I was just like, okay, maybe this isn't the Meteors record to do, but the Meteors themselves are a band to do. So that's why I ultimately went with them. Do you have any experience with this band?
No, not really. I mean, I know who they are.
Yeah. Like, I knew who they are and what they did. That's kind of it. I don't think I'd ever listened to them. No. I maybe heard a song or two, but no full albums. I wouldn't
know which Meteors records are important. I don't think that any of their records are, other than the first couple, are really considered that important. I kind of get the feeling that, like, I think for our purposes, anything by them from the 80s is probably worth talking about. Because, to be honest, like, I don't think listening to their first or second record is really going to be that different of an experience.
That is true. I don't know that there's a ton of experimenting in the first 5 Meteors albums, and I don't know what they do going forward. They stay active, but I don't know if anything they did in the 90s is really considered great. So yeah, it was just a case of I sampled all of my options and I was like, I think I'm going to have more fun listening to the Meteors than I am going to be listening to any of these other records. So out of the options I had, Fields of the Nephilim was probably the one that like should have been the pick, but I just wasn't in the mood for it. So that's why I went with the Meteors. So, okay, we were talking a little bit about horror punk, and it's basically not like a real genre yet. And you could argue it's not really a real genre in 2025 either, but we had the Misfits already. It was already a thing. Death rock is a weird genre. It was never like a huge style to begin with, so it's just a little bit of something always available. Goth rock is probably the biggest, most accessible thing because it's just so closely tied to post-punk and even a little new wave too. So psychobilly is the one we haven't touched on yet because we were going to save it for this section where we talk about the other psychobilly records. And besides the Cramps, like, they're considered the inventors of psychobilly as like a genre and even its use in music like this, but they quickly distanced themselves from the genre. And that being said, most psychobilly doesn't really sound like the Cramps. It sounds more like this, but even not even so much this record, but what this record kind of inspired. So what is psychobilly in 1987?
It's a thing. It is not as horror themed. I think a lot of it, I don't know how much the term was being applied then, but the stuff that, at least looking back, people generally categorize as psychobilly. You've got a Mojo Nixon and Skid Roper record called Bodacious.
So I saw that when I was going through, and I was like, man, if we hadn't done that like Mojo Jello record not that long ago, I'd have considered it. But then I looked at the track listing and I was like, this isn't really horror themed at all.
No. And I don't know that Mojo Nixon is consistently horror themed.
He's like Reverend Horton Heat. Like, he's called psychobilly.
Yeah.
But he sings about eating steak and smoking cigarettes. Like, that's
yeah.
Liquor in the front. Yeah, more Billy than Psycho.
You've got Screaming Blue Messiahs. They put out a record called Bikini Red. You've got a Batmobile record Bamboo Land, which we've talked about Batmobile before on the show.
Also, not a very horror-themed psychobilly band.
Yeah. A couple of different crewman records, Sweet Dreams and one called Into the Tomb. And I would wager that the Into the Tomb is a little more on the psychobilly, the horror-themed side. You got stuff by the Raymond, Schizo, the Stingrays, the Waltons, a lot of stuff I don't really know.
No,
Some of it,
no.
Names are vaguely familiar, but there's even more stuff that I'm just like, I've never heard this before. Never heard this name before. I don't think it's important, but it was there, and it gets the psychobilly tag.
Yeah, not a lot there. Yeah, Mojo Nixon and Batmobile are the ones that I was like the most familiar with. I've heard Screaming Blue Messiah's name, never listened to them myself, but everyone else I was like, I maybe have heard of the Stingrays, and I've maybe Schizo, but as far as listening to any of them, no, don't know.
But along similar lines, musically, aesthetically, you've got a little bit more mainline rockabilly and a rockabilly-influenced music. 80s was really heavy on rockabilly influences. There's a Chris Isaak record, his self-titled record.
Is Chris Isaak rockabilly? I don't think I knew that.
He's rockabilly-influenced. He's like pop rockabilly.
Yeah.
There's a Hazel Adkins record called Wild Man, which kind of gets the psychobilly, I think gets a secondary tag there. There's a Katie Lang record, which has like 6 different genres associated with it. Katie Lang's just a big old goofy freak. I love watching the Pee-wee Christmas special. She shows up and plays a song. She is all over the place. Something that I think where lines get blurred in the 80s, there's the punk blues and garage rock stuff. A lot of that stuff is truly the actual successor to the Cramps. So the record that we're talking about gets the psychobilly genre term, and the Meteors as a band define a lot of what psychobilly sounds like going forward. But psychobilly as a term, typically people associate with the Cramps. And the Cramps directly influenced a lot of stuff that doesn't get called psychobilly. There's a Pussy Galore record. These Immortal Souls put out Get Lost. Nikki Sudden and Roland S. Howard did a record together called Kiss You, Kidnap, Sharabank. There's a Flesh Tones record.
Our favorite band.
The Scientists, noisy garage rock revival band. They put out a record called Human Jukebox. And the only other thing that I would categorize as similar to psychobilly in the punk blues stuff, we still have a lot of cowpunk at this point in the 80s.
Yeah, cowpunk's still a thing.
And I think I think it's worth mentioning because they are drawing from a lot of the same places, a lot of 50s and 60s, like country and rockabilly, and there's just a lot of cross-pollination, and a lot of the cowpunk scene and the punk blues scene and the death rock scene, and a lot of that stuff is connected. Violent Femmes put out The Blind Leading the Naked. Meat Puppets had 2 records, Huevos and Mirage. There's a Long Riders record. Mekon's put out Honky Tonkin', which is a very good record. There's some Beat Farmers. There's some of your more undersung cowpunk bands. Rank and File put out their self-titled record. Blood on the Saddle put out Fresh Blood. So
I like Blood on the Saddle a lot.
Lots of cowpunk. And I think that's a very similar genre to psychobilly.
And to look at the label mates, this came out on Anagram Records. So Anagram Records in 1987 features, we already mentioned them, but Alien Sex Fiend, Here Come Germs, Alternative TV's Peep Show, and a soundtrack called Maggie, 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 Out, 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 which was like a Margaret Thatcher, like protest thing. It's not, they call it a soundtrack, but there's like, it's not a movie. It's not a play. It's not any of that kind of stuff. It's just weird. I don't know exactly what that is, but it's not it's not this. But that's what Anagram has in 87, which not a ton. And I'll talk about Anagram a little bit more here in the story. So
Crazy woman, and I really lose my mind. Oh well, I drive a million
put a rocket in my pocket and the trouble's just begun. I like my rockin' nice and hard, no fancy clothes from milk and I'm a low-living daddy, and I get my fun for free. Oh, well, I don't drive nowhere slowly, I don't come back here sane. I never bought no petrol, got no ticket for a train. Well, my jacket's made of leather and my boots made of good clay. I hang around the streets all night with cats that act real mean. I drive around to see the pretty girls and give a shot to I'm a low-living daddy. Open the door and let me out. Wow!
Let's get into the story. So, originally formed in London in 1980 by guitarist and singer P. Paul Fenwick, bassist Nigel Lewis, and drummer Mark Robertson. Fenwick and Lewis had previously played in the rockabilly band The Southern Boys together, but they left to start the duo Rock Therapy. They then added their drummer, Mark Robertson, and changed their name to Raw Deal. And then within that sound, they began to experiment with rockabilly and mixing elements of punk rock and lyrics centered around horror and sci-fi films to become the Meteors. The Meteors are considered one of the earliest and most influential psychobilly bands of all time. They started off in the neo-rockabilly scene of the UK, which is the same scene where the Stray Cats come out of, but there was a big rockabilly scene in the 70s in the UK. We saw a little bit of that in that documentary we watched with like those teddies complaining about punks. So while the Cramps are like the first band to really call their music psychobilly, they also quickly distanced themselves from it and then didn't really define it for everyone else. They kind of were just like, oh, never mind, let's just keep moving. But the Meteors are the ones who were like, okay, we were playing rockabilly, but we like horror movies and we like sci-fi and we like punk rock. So let's mix it. Let's mix it all together and do that. It's funny. The UK neo-rockabilly scene really shunned the Meteors in the beginning because they thought they were too spooky and mean. Which you look at this record and you're like, it's not that spooky.
I don't get it. The Teddy Boys took themselves way too seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
The whole UK rockabilly scene in general is just really weird. It's like you're doing a rehash of American rock music from 30 years ago.
And yeah, you're British weirdos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you like kind of take yourself too seriously.
I also like that they complained about them being too mean. Oh, they were mean to me. That's probably like the punk snottiness that they were channeling.
Which it's like, if you're doing rockabilly, isn't that all mean?
Yeah.
Like, isn't that the thing? Like, the greaser rockabilly guys from the 50s are like pieces of shit. Like, that's the like Jerry Lee Lewis, you know.
Yeah.
It's about getting hopped up on vintage speed and getting in fights.
So there's a really good article that I read. I think the website is called furious.com, and they have like an article on psychobilly and like the early days of psychobilly. And it talks about there were like 2 UK bands that were predate the Meteors who played what was considered psychobilly at the time. One of them, like, they didn't record anything. It's a case of like the Screamers, you know, being like super important band to the LA punk scene in the 70s, but like they had no albums. It's kind of in that same vein where it's just like, oh, okay. And then the other band, I can't remember the name of these bands, but the other one was also like, they were kind of like the Replacements, kind of in their own way, just like messing up their own opportunities. So the Meteors are the ones who like really put it all together and really make a name and really start to create a scene. Funnily, the original psychobilly music genre was designed to be an escapist genre. They, as an unwritten rule, were meant to not be political. I think part of that was just to be like, look at us. You don't want to hear political things from us. We just want to have some fun. It also kind of leads the psychobilly scene to also have a lot more conservative members than maybe some of the other punk genres out there. Their style of music is also attracts, you know, conservative people, country music fans, rockabilly fans, and by not explicitly talking political and staying apolitical as a genre, it kind of lets them in. But
yeah, that's kind of a curse of every retro scene.
Yeah,
like if you're doing something retro, you're going to appeal to the kind of person who likes that stuff because it's back when marginalized people have less rights.
Yeah.
They're attracted to that because it's like, oh, that's the way the world should be, it's like, no, it just looks cool, dude.
So they managed to make it to UK television before they'd released any records. And they actually even made a short film called Meteor Madness, which aired as a double feature with the two-tone ska film Dance Craze in 1981. So that got them a lot of attention. Them doing TV got them attention. They did a 4-song EP that was basically just the songs that they played from that short, and that was their first single. It was released on Ace Records. That was then followed by the double A-side single Radioactive Kid and Graveyard Stomp, and they then signed with Island Records in 1981. UK punk and punk genre bands all being major labels is very funny to me. They're like, we're anti-authority, but here we've all signed with major corporations. So they released their debut album In Heaven on Lost Soul Records in 1981. I think that's an imprint of Island. I'm not exactly sure what that is. Lost Souls. They might have just been what they just put on this record. But then they followed that up with Wreckin' Crew in 1983 on ID Records, Stampede in 1984, and Monkey's Breath in 1985 on Mad Pig Records. And then the band signed to Anagram Records and released Sewer Time Blues in 1986, which was their most successful album to date at that time. So they've already, cranked out 5 albums before we got to this one. The band has gone through numerous lineup changes with P. Paul Fennick, I think they just call him Paul, being the only permanent member. This is the first album for this rhythm section. We have drummer Toby Griffin. This is his first thing total. He replaced the previous drummer Ian Spider Cubitt, who had played on the last 3 albums by the Meteors, and bassist Arms Malone replaced bassist Austin H. Stones, who was a one-and-done bassist. And it's kind of like that across the rest of their catalog. Though I believe he's had the same drummer, because the Meteors are still around today. I think he has had the same drummer for like 15 years now, which is the only time that's ever happened. So the band went into the studio to record with engineer Colin Peter, who the band had worked with on their 1985 album Monkey's Breath. He had previously recorded with Angelic Upstarts as well. And they recorded at London Bridge Studios, which is to not be confused with the London Bridge Studios in Seattle, where Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains recorded at. Discogs has it. If you click on the link to the studio, it goes to that one, and you have to go find a different release to find the other UK studio. This is the band's second album for Anagram. Like I said, Anagram is a sub-label of Cherry Red Records, which has come up multiple times now in the last few weeks, and released on various different labels around the world. Prior to this, Anagram also released albums by Angelic Upstarts and The Vibrators. And the album opens up with a cover of Go Buddy Go, which is a Stranglers song. And this song was picked up by John Peel, who began playing at his radio show, caused the label to scramble and release it as a single. He just liked the cover and was playing it, and then they're like, oh fuck, we gotta make it a single. And Wildcat Ways has a songwriting credit for Jimmy Lee Macelin, or McKellen. I'm not sure exactly how that's pronounced. It's British, so it could be McKellen, which is his only credit on Discogs, so I don't know who that guy was. Maybe he was just a friend of the Meteors. The album artwork is by Michelle Vandekloot, aka Michelle Fennick, who has done artwork primarily for the Meteors. I suspect this is his wife. And the cover is a photo of a giant strawberry. It looks like a paper mache or like some sort of large construction thing with the band's name and the album title written in spooky fonts. It's not a very good album cover. It's pretty bad. And the sleeve concept is credited to the Fennick Foundation, which I suspect is just Paul and Michelle being like, all right, what do we want to do? And the record is considered to be their most varied release, with critics claiming that they were very repetitive before, so this was them trying out new things. And the version on Spotify is the 2005 reissue with the bonus tracks as well. So, just 3 bonus tracks. All right, the Meteors, Don't Touch the Bang Bang Fruit. What'd you think of it?
It was all right. I think it probably was the most fun option of the records that you were considering. It certainly has its moments. It's not amazing. I don't know if I'll come back to it, but I don't know that there's very much rockabilly in general that I ever want to come back to. We've said it many times before, but you kind of pick your one psychobilly band.
Yeah, right. And early on we picked Reverend Horde and Heat. I guess now I would just say it's probably just the Cramps, even though they reject the term. It is the genre,
Yeah. So there's just not a whole lot about this sound that I want to come back to. But if I hear it and if it's decent, it's something I can sit through and enjoy enough. And I think that this record is a pretty enjoyable record from beginning to end. Really not too difficult to listen to. And to a point, I see the appeal of it. There's enough here to make a solid case for the Meteors as a band. Even though this is maybe not the most representative record in their discography, it's not the most important record in their discography, I think that it's an enjoyable enough listen, and they have enough unique qualities where I can see why they're so influential for psychobilly. Funny enough, I think they do define a lot of what psychobilly sounds like going forward, but a lot of psychobilly that comes after this, a lot of that European psychobilly that really carries the genre for the next few decades, I think misses the best qualities of the Meteors. Very similar to the Cramps, where it's like most psychobilly doesn't sound like the Cramps. A lot of psychobilly does sound similar to the Meteors, but just like not the best aspects. It's like you got the general template right, but you missed the good parts, I feel like.
I see what you mean. I see what you mean, because the best parts about this record are not what gets carried into psychobilly. So yeah, I see what you mean. The best parts of this record are really tied into that rockabilly side that they came out of.
Everything you got, just give it to me. I don't hear you talk, don't take no excuse. So when you get behind, they turn me loose. I see right through everything you say. You try all the tricks, but I won't go away. I take your car, most anything I can. Your mind and soul, 'cause I'm a Repo Man, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is probably the most fun record that we could have chosen to talk about. I think that's accurate. I think that it's a pretty fun album. Like I just in general had a pretty good time listening to it. I didn't really have any major issues with it. Yeah, it's an interesting record. So if we're really trying to think of like psychobilly as like this genre where there's like horror themes with their stuff, and there's not a ton of horror in this record. Like Midnight People, I would say, is there. Your Worst Nightmare. Repo Man, actually, I would say, is a pretty good one. And then like a lot of the other stuff is just kind of like, Low Livin' Daddy and Wildcat Ways feel kind of like just like rockabilly, themes. Don't Touch the Bang Bang Fruit might be something weird, but I don't know. The horror themes aren't like overboard on this record.
Yeah, I do think that of their records, this is one of the less B-movie horror-influenced records. They have others that are much more clearly horror-themed.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a weird record because it is like them trying to do something a little different at a time where they already put out several records. So yeah, I do think that, stuff like the first 2 or 3 albums probably do fit in there. They have, like, the first record's got songs like Earwigs in My Brain, Attack of the Zorchmen, The Crazed, Teenagers from Outer Space, Maniac, Into the Darkness, Death Dance, Psycho for Your Love, Rockabilly Psychosis. So a lot of that kind of falls into the more horror themes that they're going for. So it could be just a case of them being like, oh, you don't like how we do this? Then all right, we're going to try something different for this record. And then, like, the next record is called The Mutant Monkey and the Surfers from Zorch. And look at the track listing on that one. It's songs called Swamp Thing, Electro 11 The Revenge, Sidewalk Psycho, I'm Invisible Man, Surfing on the Planet Zorch, Spinebender, They do a version of Rawhide on there. And so Meet Me at the Morgue. So that record itself is already more horror-y. And then, just for curiosity, Sewer Time Blues, the record prior to this, is... That record doesn't really have a lot either. So maybe they were trying to get away from it a little bit at some point, but they went back to it pretty heavily after this. So, yeah, this is very similar like when we did that Batmobile record where we're like, there's not really anything horror-themed about this record at all.
Yeah.
This one at least has a couple. This one fits more like a Groovy Ghoulies record that has like 4 or 5 songs. I do have a good time. There's nothing groundbreaking here, which, is that possible with psychobilly? Yeah, rockabilly is a retro genre, so it's kind of hard to like break new ground when you're doing a throwback style. Psychobilly is the innovation that rockabilly would have gotten. And even then sonically, psychobilly stuff is it's still just rockabilly musically. There, some bands incorporate more punk elements to it, but it's a lyrics-based genre more so than anything. Lyrics and imagery based.
Imagery, a big part of it. Like, having the aesthetic does a lot of the heavy lifting. It's kind of similar to horror punk, where it's like musically what actually differentiates this from punk.
The Misfits themselves, they did the doo-wop thing with punk music, and that was the thing that kind of made them different. But doo-wop's not scary. So doo-wop is not a horror genre. So,
but is that even that different from the Ramones being influenced by, Beat and Mod and the Beach Boys,
Bubblegum,
and Phil Spector?
Yeah. Misfits doing doo-wop compared to Ramones doing that. Yeah, I mean it's basically the same thing. Well, a lot of early punk though is like it's just being like this is what rock music sounded like in the 60s. So let's simplify it. Because, we all know the story of what rock was in the 70s in the UK. It was all prog rock and very excessive, and everybody had to have like musical degrees from Juilliard, and then these kids with no training showed up. And so, yeah, they were just playing stuff from their childhood in a simpler way, and then beefed up with like a Stooges kind of MC5 energy. So in a way, the Meteors are doing what the original wave of punk is. Something from the past brought forward.
Yeah.
And edged up.
Yeah. That is the big innovation with psychobilly. It is, okay, let's take Gene Vincent and Jerry Lee Lewis and crank up the guitars and have, full drum kits.
And be mean.
Yeah. And I guess rockabilly rockabilly revival is more often trying to do a very faithful recreation of rockabilly.
Which I do think is probably rockabilly's downfall, because essentially once you hit like the 90s, rockabilly and psychobilly are almost interchangeable.
Yeah.
Like the rockabilly, the stuff that gets some rockabilly attention is really more like country musicians doing a rockabilly thing. Your Steve Earle did a little bit of it. Does Dwight Yoakam, does he have a little bit of rockabilly in some of his sound too?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where all the rockabilly like went. It's like you're either just a country musician who's doing some rockabilly stuff, or you're just in this puddle of psychobilly and rockabilly bands kind of just like together. I mean, Brian Setzer, I guess, made a pretty good distinction. But even then, I feel like the Stray Cats were still like a punk-influenced rockabilly band.
Yeah.
At least in the 80s. And then once you get to the 90s, then he does Brian Setzer Orchestra, and that's like more swing than rockabilly too. And yeah. I think it's like, because really what Reverend Horton Heat is doing should just be called rockabilly, but maybe because he just embraced that psychobilly term so early, named a song Psychobilly Freakout, that he kind of went with it.
Reverend Horton Heat is a really good example of what psychobilly can be without limiting it to singing about zombies and stuff. Like there's a very good case for calling Reverend Horton Heat a psychobilly band, because there's an intensity to how he played. And there's an intensity to the Meteors too.
Yeah, it's an energy, it's an attitude, which I think you're right, is why you still call Reverend Horton Heat psychobilly and not just a regular rockabilly band, because he is doing punk-infused rockabilly. It's just, he's like, I'm not going to sing about vampire bats. That's my main difference.
Yeah. I'm from Deep Ellum, Texas.
Yeah. But even bands like Southern Culture on the Skids, you know, like they're sometimes called a psychobilly band. I don't think that really fits them either, but it does in the sense that they have some punk elements in their sound. So
yeah,
that's where it goes. I think psychobilly is kind of a funny genre where it's like, it's dominated by the spooky bands, but you don't have to be a spooky band to be a psychobilly band. You just got to use some like punk and alternative sounds in your style. So
yeah. I think that it's a genre that is at its best. I think it's a genre that is pushing towards extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Musically, I mean, and I think that's what the best aspects of this Meteors record are. I think it's funny that "Go Buddy Go" is a Strangler song.
Yeah. I listened back to it just to kind of see what it sounded like and how different it was, and they did change it up instrumentally. Like it's played very different, but it like the melody's the same pretty much. They "Go Buddy Go Buddy Go Buddy Go." That's the same. It's just you have that Wurlitzer keyboard in the background that the Stranglers put on all their songs.
There's a lot of snarl to the guitar. You know, there's when they bring in the harmonica, it's like this overblowing kind of pub rock harmonica thing, and like there's just this really loud drums, which I mean is partially it's just kind of that 80s, you know, extremely roomy drum sound, but there's just like you feel like they're hitting the drums really hard. Like when you hear it, you're like, they are hitting the drums as hard as they can. They're playing the guitar kind of sloppy and like they really have some snot and spit to it. And like, I think that is what you do with it. Like if you're going to do rockabilly, instead of just being like, I'm just going to do, you know, recreations of Elvis, like going, okay, these riffs are actually really hard. And like, if you play them faster, they get harder to play and they cut, you know, they have a viciousness to them. And that's a lot of what I really enjoy about this record. And I think it's what a lot of psychobilly bands, a lot of the European psychobilly bands actually kind of miss. And I think that a lot of the later psychobilly bands do regress into more of a rockabilly rehash. The whole obsession with having the click sound of the bass.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, really fixating on having these specific things because it's like, oh, that's how it has to sound. That's got to you got to do it traditional. It's like, well, that's not the point of doing psychobilly.
Yeah,
like the point of doing psychobilly is like, hey, rockabilly is actually kind of cool and really fun to play, and we're watching these punk bands that are, you know, blowing it out every night. Like mentioning the MC5 and the Stooges as being like, that's a great connection to make because I think that is where a lot of these bands were inspired. They're like, I want to be that extreme. And if anything, psychobilly should have progressed towards like hardcore. And I think that a lot of the people that were coming from the, you know, the Cramp side and like the US bands that go off into the punk blues things, or even like Australian stuff like Nick Cave, like that whole punk blues scene, they're more in line, I think, in the thinking of a band like the Meteors, because they are pushing towards ugliness and extremity. And I think once you get into kind of your Tiger Armies and your horror pops, you're pushing towards something that is a lot more slick and polished and is more about taking those edges off, but having the look of being tough and scary. Like, oh, I'm into monster movies and I'm covered in tattoos, but like you're not really playing very extreme music.
And you kind of see that with like the bands that came out of the first wave in the UK. You know, like the other bands are like Guana Bats. It's like, oh, okay, that's not in Batmobile, like we already talked about. You know, just like, okay, they're here. Yeah. They're just like, they don't push any boundaries. And really, they do say like the second wave kind of kicks off with Demented Argo. And then that kind of leads into what, Mad Sin, and then the Necromantics. I genuinely think the Necromantics are probably the band that's the most responsible for what we think of a psychobilly band today.
Yeah.
And they're not very good. Like, just were never very good, you know? I mean, like, Demented Argo were a UK band, or, yeah, British band, but, like, Yeah, it's the Necromantics' fault. I think it's why we're just like, we got to have the click, we got to have the thing, this is what we got to look like. We got to all have cool flat tops, and we got to be covered in tattoos, and every song has to be horror themed. And it just kind of becomes a caricature. Honestly, psychobilly is stale. It is so stale. What is psychobilly in 2025?
None. There's nothing.
Right. Like, when was the last time you heard of a new psychobilly band that was like making some waves, Nobody. It's Tiger Army, right? Like, they're the last one to kind of crack that. And they spin out of that same scene where a lot of like the street punk and the oi and a lot of the, basically all the boot to head stuff, the Hellcat records, like that's the last time psychobilly like kind of had a moment.
Yeah. If you look up psychobilly in 2025, there's a Super Suckers record, which isn't even really a psychobilly band.
Right.
There's a Demented Are Go record.
Still at it.
And there's a band called The Brains from Montreal. They started in 2002. Their album cover looks like a Necromantics album.
Yeah.
They look like they're doing Necromantics.
So we have
psychobilly really turned into Necromantics core.
Yeah, it really did. They stopped innovating on the genre. Like, it just like it is now a stale genre. They all copied the Meteors,
which I mean, I guess
and Necromantics.
Like, we got the look, we got the double bass. There's only 3 of us in the band. We got the right tattoos. And now we get the pinup girls.
Yeah. I guess so much of the
goal.
I guess so much of the genre, or the scene, not necessarily the genre, is so focused on the look that they're like, we don't have time to innovate. We're spending so much money on vintage clothing now.
The music doesn't actually have to be good or interesting. It just has to fit the expectation.
I feel like an artist today could make waves by just going back to rockabilly and trying to do something a little different with it. Now, I feel like any innovation we're going to see in any Billy genres will be because somebody went back to rockabilly and was like, yeah, let's try and bring this back, figure out a way to do this. And it's probably going to be a country artist doing it, because I just looked up like rockabilly in 2025 on Rate Your Music, and there's nobody either. It's another dead genre, but Volbeat is the number one and is as a secondary, so they probably just have a song.
Well,
but that sucks.
You can kind of zoom out. There's like Messer Chups. They're kind of more surf. They're broadly psychobilly, surf, Halloween music.
Yeah, I could see surf actually probably getting into that more, because there's so much like surf from the 60s that is like horror themed. Post Monster Mash, there were just like a billion artists that were doing like surf with songs about vampires. And I mean, the record itself, I mean, does anything stand out to you on this album? I have a few tracks I actually really enjoyed.
Yeah, I think the opening track, Go Buddy Go, is solid.
It's fun.
I think Low Livin' Daddy's pretty good.
I like Low Livin' Daddy a lot. That's one of my favorites. I love the harmonica on there. There's like solos on every song, and most songs have more than one solo too, so that I do appreciate that. I thought the song Repo Man was really fun as well. It's like a mid-pace song, but I really like just how that song sounds. It's got like a bunch of cowbell on it too. The lyrics are kind of fun because the idea is like, he's a Repo Man, but he's going to repossess your skeleton. And there's like a line in there about like, I'll eat your dog, and that kind of stuff. So he made it like a horror-themed Repo Man. Like, I guess that stupid movie that everybody loved from the 2000s, Repo the Genetic Opera.
Wildcat Ways is pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a decent record. Like, I really wasn't mad at any of it. I think Don't Touch the Bang Bang Fruit's kind of the dumbest song on there.
My favorite part of the song is where he says, "Speed it up, Juggy Wuggy." Yeah, I feel like the record falls off after Repo Man. I do think Crack Me Up is a fun, like, Chuck Berry kind of style song. But as far as, like, Shaky Shaky, Psycho Cat, Let's Go, and the closer, Revenge of El Trio dos Bastardos, which is a instrumental spaghetti western style song. Little peek behind the curtain. We recorded this the same day we did our Babes in Toyland episode too, and I had to listen to both of the records this morning to refresh myself before the show, and both ending on instrumental tracks really was just like, what are we doing? Let's stop this. Yeah, I think, because Crack Me Up is pretty good, but yeah, the back half of that record is pretty weak. It's a very front-loaded album to me.
Yeah. Like, Shaky Snakey's okay. It's not...
It's okay. I mean, yeah.
It just loses steam. I think the record overall just kind of loses some steam.
Yeah. It's like a 40-something minute record with the bonus tracks, so I think it's under 40 minutes runtime. I do think that might be a little long for this album, but it did seem like the songs all kind of go on for a long time, too. I mean, I guess when nearly every song has 2 solos in it, that's going to add some length to your tracks, but yeah, it is a record where I'm kind of ready to be done. Once we get past Crack Me Up, I'm just like, okay, I don't need these last 4 songs. This is a 25-minute album. I might think this is a 5-star record, but it's...
I wouldn't go that far, but...
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. The other thing that I kept thinking about the whole time I was listening to this record is he sounds like Roger Miller.
I don't know Roger Miller well enough to know, or at all, really. So it doesn't really mean anything to me. But he does...
Dang me. They ought to take a rope and hang me. His voice sounds very similar to Roger Miller. And they both do like... kind of like stuff with their voice.
You know, it kept reminding me of Red Dwarf for some reason. So like, you know, the music that Lister listens to is called like... Rastabilly is what it's called. And I keep thinking of him. I think it's Lister. I don't think it's Rimmer, but he's just scream singing down like the hallway or at someone. It's like, "Do you like rock, Rastabilly?" And just the way he sings it, I'm like, oh, he was listening to the Meteors. And then that song early on, the like, "See you later, alligator," that song being featured in the one guy's the first hologram's funeral in the first like episode. I was like, oh, it sounds like the Meteors guy. And it made me wonder, I was like, did this guy do voiceover? I could see him doing something like that. Yeah, he has a funny cartoonish voice, which works, I guess, for psychobilly. A funny cartoonish genre of music. Yeah, he's got like no credits. Well, is this him? No, that's a different guy. So yeah. Well, let's do the aftermath, because we gotta wrap things up here. So this is Arms Malone's only album with the Meteors. He would leave right after this album. Toby Griffith would play on one more record, The Mutant Monkey and the Surfers of Zorch in 1988, and he would also leave the band. I think this is the case. It's probably a different rhythm section on like nearly every single record. Like I said, the drummer from the last 15 years is like the only one that's had that long of a run. They are still active today. They have released 18 more albums after this one. So that's at least 24 LPs by the Meteors. That's a lot. And that's not even really counting like studio albums and compilations and things like that. Very prolific. Paul also has like a ton of solo records too. Like 7 or 8 solo records. Also the same genre. And he had like a bunch of side projects too. All the same genre. The dude has probably released close to 40 LPs of music. And they're almost all psychobilly, rockabilly kind of records. Dude knows what he's got, I guess. I don't know. Final thoughts on this record before we rate it and get out of here.
Fun enough. I wasn't mad to have listened to it. I won't come back to it, probably. But I would maybe listen to something else by the Meteors. Probably one of the earlier records just to hear it.
Yeah, I had fun with it. I enjoyed it. It made me more interested in their earlier stuff, but you're right. I don't know that I'll come back to this specific album. I might check out like those first 2, because those I think are kind of considered like the biggest records for them. Though they said, what was it called? Sewer Time Blues was like actually their most successful to date at that point. So that might be worth looking at. But I think the first 2 are kind of considered the ones that people still care about today. So I'd probably check those out. But I'm not listening to like 24 albums by the Meteors. They will not be as challengeography in the future, because I don't think I would have anything new to say. And all right, so let's rate it and get out of here. Let's do this. Did we win?
Broke even?
I say we won. It sounds like I enjoyed it more than you, so we can give it a rating. What do you think?
I might call this a 2.5. I had it marked as a 3 originally. That actually, now that I'm looking at it in the, I don't know, the cold light of day, that seems a little high.
I think I'm gonna go with like a 3.5. I did actually had a pretty good time listening to it. I think there are a number of songs that are actually really good and really fun, at least 3 or 4. But that back half, the back half is what I think holds it from being like a stronger record for me personally. But yeah, I liked it enough that I'll definitely consider an earlier Meteors. It is October, so it's a great time to be listening to the Meteors and psychobilly in general. So yeah, maybe I'll try one of those other records and see. All right, well, that will do it for this week. We appreciate all of you for listening, and you can continue to follow our Halloween Spooktacular next week. Dylan will be choosing a record for us to talk about. I assume you'll probably pick something that's not psychobilly. I don't think we should do 2 weeks in a row.
All psychobilly, all month long. Probably, but it depends on the year.
Yeah, well, I already have your year for you, so we'll find out. But that'll do it. So thank you all so much for listening. You can follow us online everywhere at punklautopod, punklautopod@gmail.com. Our voicemail line, 202-688-PUNK. We still have a couple more to play, but we've been gimmick mode so much lately that we just haven't really played them. So probably once we get back into the swing of regular things. But where should we follow you online, Dylan?
You could follow me at Husker Dylan or Major Awards Band, whichever one. If you play bass and live in Los Angeles and would like to join Major Awards, we have an opening for you. So please get in touch and we'll try you out. And yeah, that's all I got to plug.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. We will talk to you next time. Talk to you later.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.